unlock your world one word at a time. Because language isn't just about learning, it's about living. Unlock the world through language. Learning a new language isn't just about words. It's about expanding your horizons, enhancing your career, and connecting with people globally. Whether you are a language learner or educator, the Languages Pedagogy Podcast is your go-to resource for expert insights, innovative strategies, and practical tips to supercharge your language journey. Tune in now to sharpen your skills, deepen your understanding, and join a community passionate about the power of language. Let's get started. Wonderful listeners, welcome back to another episode of the Languages Pedagogy Podcast. Today, we're exploring one of the most ancient and powerful methods for learning, through stories. Now, for centuries, humans have used storytelling to pass down knowledge, share experiences, and connect across cultures. But what if I told you that stories are also one of the most effective tools for learning languages? That's right. Stories and narratives don't just engage our imagination. They provide an immersive way to learn vocabulary, grammar, and cultural nuances, naturally and effortlessly. Today, we're going to dive deep into the art of learning languages through storytelling. So grab your headphones, settle in, and let's explore how stories can transform your language learning journey.
Audio Jungle.
And let's begin by talking about why stories are such a powerful tool for learning languages. Think about it. Stories are how we've always made sense of the world, long before we had textbooks or formal education systems. People passed down wisdom and knowledge through oral traditions, myths, fables, and folktales. These stories weren't just entertaining. They taught lessons, preserved culture, and most importantly, they were memorable. And here's the magic. Stories make language memorable. They activate our emotions and imagination, making the language more engaging and easier to retain. When we read or listen to a story in a foreign language, we're not just learning words in isolation. We're learning them in context. The characters, events, and emotion provide a framework that helps the vocabulary stick in our mind. But there's another layer here. Stories also immerse us in the culture of the language we're learning. They give us insight into the values, beliefs, and ways of thinking of the people who speak that language. So, when you learn through stories, you're not just learning how to say words. You're learning how to think in that language, how to understand its cultural nuances, and a little bit more there. So, why does this work so well? It's because stories engage both our logical and emotional sides. When you're reading or hearing a story, your brain is actively processing the narrative, following the plot, and predicting what happens next. At the same time, you're experiencing emotions, curiosity, suspense, excitement. This dual engagement helps reinforce the language patterns and vocabulary you're encountering. It's a holistic way of learning that taps into how our brains are wired to understand the world. Let's take a closer look at how storytelling helps with two essential aspects of language learning: vocabulary and grammar. So when you're reading a story in your target language, you encounter new words in context. Instead of memorizing vocabulary lists, you're learning words naturally by seeing how they fit into sentences and situations. For example, if you're reading a story about a character visiting a bakery, you're likely to pick up words related to food, ordering, and everyday conversation. These words make sense in the context of the story, so you're more likely to remember them. But stories don't just help with vocabulary, they also teach grammar. You see how verbs are conjugated, how adjectives agree with nouns, and how different sentence structure work. But here's the key difference. You are not consciously thinking about grammar rules while reading. Instead, you're internalizing them. It's similar to how we learn our native language as children. We weren't memorizing grammar rules at age 5, but we were listening to stories, absorbing the patterns of the language, and gradually figuring out. One of the best examples of this is how verb tenses are used in stories. Stories naturally move between the past, present, and future, helping you see how different tenses function in a fluid way. You're not just learning the future tense from a textbook. You're reading about a character making plans for the next day, which reinforces how the future tense is used in real life. So when you read or listen stories, you're getting a double benefit. You're expanding your vocabulary while reinforcing your understanding of grammar. And because it's happening naturally within the narrative, the learning process feels effortless. You're not just memorizing, you're experiencing the language. Now, let's talk about immersion again. Language learners often dream of that magical state of immersion, where you're surrounded by the language and absorbing it effortlessly. While moving to a country where the language is spoken is one way to immerse yourself, there's another method that's just as effective: immersion through stories. When you read a book or listen to an audiobook in a foreign language, you're entering a world where that language is the only mode of communication. You're essentially creating a mini immersion experience wherever you are. The beauty of storytelling is that it allows you to immerse yourself in a language and culture without needing to travel. For example, if you're learning Spanish, reading a novel set in Spain or Latin America lets you experience the daily life, cultural norms, and unique expressions of the region. You're picking up idiomatic phrases, regional slang, and cultural references that you might not find in traditional language courses. It's like traveling without leaving your living room. Moreover, audiobooks take this immersion to another level. When you listen to stories, you're hearing the rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation of native speakers. Audiobooks help you train your ear to understand the natural flow of the language. You can hear how words connect, how expressions are used, and how emotions are conveyed through tone of voice. It's a highly immersive experience that improves both your listening and speaking skills. Listening to stories also helps with passive learning, a concept that's incredibly effective but often overlooked. When you're listening to a story, you might not understand every single word, but you're still absorbing the language. Your brain is picking up on patterns, structures, and new vocabulary without you having to consciously focus on it. This passive absorption is a key element of immersion and one of the reasons why storytelling is such a powerful learning tool. One of the greatest benefits of learning languages through stories is that it helps you develop a deeper understanding of that culture behind the language. Language and culture are inseparable. Every language is shaped by the values, history, and worldview of the people who speak it. When you read a story in another language, you're not just learning the language, you're stepping into a new cultural experience. Take, for example, classic literature from the country whose language you're learning. If you're studying French, reading Les Miserables, I think it is, or Le Petit Prince, not only helps you with the language, but also gives you insight into French culture. values, and history. You start to understand the cultural context in which certain phrases are used, and you gain a deeper appreciation for the nuances of the language. Even modern stories, like novels or films, provide a window into the everyday life and mindset of native speakers. If you're learning Japanese, for example, reading manga or watching anime introduces you to cultural practices, social norms, and expressions that reflect contemporary Japanese society. These narratives give you a much richer understanding of the culture than you could get from a textbook. Stories can also break down cultural stereotypes. By experiencing a variety of narratives, you learn to see the diversity within a culture. You realize that no single story represents an entire nation or people. These cultural insights help you become not just a better language learner, but also a more empathetic and informed global citizen. Now that we've explored the why and how of learning through stories, let's dive into some practical tips for integrating storytelling into your language learning journey. Start with graded readers. If you're a beginner or intermediate learner, you don't have to jump straight into full novels. Start with graded readers, which are books specifically designed for language learners at different levels. These stories are written with simplified vocabulary and grammar, making them accessible while still providing the benefits of learning through context. 2. Children's book and fables. Don't underestimate the power of children's literature. Classic children's stories are often rich in simple yet beautiful language, making them perfect for learners of all levels. Fables and fairy tales, in particular, are filled with recurrent themes and structures that make them easy to follow. 3. Use audiobooks and podcasts. If you prefer to learn on the go, audiobooks and podcasts are a fantastic way to engage with stories. Look for audiobooks narrated by native speakers, as this will help you with pronunciation and listening skills. You can also find storytelling podcasts in various languages that offer a mix of entertainment and education, just like this one. 4. Create your own stories. One of the most effective ways to reinforce your learning is to create your own stories, of course in your target language. Whether it's writing short stories, journaling about your day, or recording yourself telling a story, this practice helps you think in the language and use the vocabulary and grammar you've learned in a creative way. 5. Watch movies and series. Visual storytelling through movies and TV shows is another powerful tool. It combines language with cultural and visual context, giving you a multi-sensory learning experience. Try watching films with subtitles in the target language so you can follow along with both the spoken and written word. 6. Engage with native speakers. Share stories with native speakers through language exchange platforms like iTalki or Tandem. You can practice storytelling in conversation or ask your language partner to tell you stories from their culture. This not only improves your speaking skill, but also deepens your connection to the language and its people. As we wrap up today's episode, I hope you've been inspired to integrate storytelling into your language learning journey. Whether you are reading novels, listening to audiobooks, or crafting your own stories, remember that storytelling isn't just a fun way to learn. It's an incredibly effective method for building vocabulary, grammar, and cultural understanding. By learning through stories, you're engaging both your mind and your emotions. You're immersing yourself in the language, absorbing its rhythms, and making meaningful connections that go beyond rote memorization. And most importantly, you are learning to think, feel, and experience the language in a way that's both natural and powerful. Hey, and before going any further, Just want to remind you, new episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so make sure to tune in weekly for your dose of thought-provoking conversations. You can find our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and Amazon Music as well. Or you can come and pay a visit to our website, MikeEnglishOnline.com, where you're going to be able to find really good and interesting material that you can actually use for your classes or for yourself. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and follow us for more. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Languages Pedagogy Podcast. As always, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with learning through stories. Have you discovered any great books, audiobooks, or podcasts in your target language? Feel free to share your thoughts with me. I love to keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep reading, keep telling stories, and happy learning.